In a world ruled by kings and fear, one man's faith dared to challenge an empire. An epic occurrence begins the life story of Daniel, a young Judahite aristocrat, and changes the course of his entire life. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, a prominent player in ancient Near Eastern affairs, besieged Jerusalem, the Jews' sacred city. The siege was more than just a display of force. It marked the beginning of a spiritual and cultural revolution that would have far-reaching consequences for future generations. Consider this: a city that was once humming with activity is now surrounded by an uninterested army. Faced with the Babylonians' might, the fortifications that had previously protected the Jews appeared feeble. Daniel, a young man, torn from his birthplace and forced to travel to an unknown destination, was among the juvenile inmates. He would feel as if he had been transported to another planet by the extent of the cultural shock that lay ahead. Daniel's extraordinary qualities did not stem from his distinguished family or privileged background. His faith in God remained unwavering during his exile. Most people would have felt abandoned or betrayed by God in such a scenario, but Daniel utilized it to strengthen his faith. Our faith is tried and tested again in the darkest hours, as his attitude so beautifully demonstrates. Despite being in prison, tiny Daniel remained resilient. His convictions remained strong as he adapted to his new situation. The ability to adapt without losing essence is an important lesson for all of us in today's ever-changing world. Daniel's example teaches us how to persist in the face of adversity while remaining true to our ideals. Daniel's spiritual and emotional journeys to Babylon were equally essential as his physical ones. In order to enter a new and potentially dangerous environment, he abandoned his entire existence, including his loved ones, culture, and family. However, Daniel refused to give up hope and saw this transition as an opportunity. His presence in the Babylonian court may have had a greater purpose, he reflected. Daniel's exile demonstrates the importance of resilience in the face of adversity. What points in our lives make us feel like outsiders? Perhaps in a bad relationship, a new location, or a new job. Regardless matter our location or the challenges we face, Daniel's story urges us to be committed and honest. Daniel did not practice faith quietly or in secret. It manifested in his daily decisions and behavior. All of this serves as a reminder to live our values rather than simply talking about them. How can we demonstrate our religion to the world via our actions, even in locations where our views may not be openly accepted? While many believed that the Babylonian captivity marked the end of the story, Daniel saw it as only the beginning. The fact that he has managed to maintain faith and optimism in the face of so much suffering speaks volumes. He demonstrates that no matter how bad things get, there is always a way to turn them around and make a positive influence if we approach them in the right way. How should we respond when our faith is tested? That is the question Daniel's narrative raises. When confronted with adversity, do we give in or adhere to our principles? Daniel chose to remain faithful not out of defiance or stubbornness, but because he felt his God was greater than any hardship he could face. As we continue to investigate Daniel's story, we will see how his unwavering faith spurred him to overcome even greater challenges. His path teaches us that true power comes from inner belief, not good external conditions. How could Daniel, a man of faith, navigate the maze of Babylonian authority? The next installment in his incredible story is now available. When Daniel and his companions arrived in Babylon, they began a new chapter in their lives. King Nebuchadnezzar recruited these young Jews to serve in the royal court because he recognized their promise. This was no ordinary honor. It was a huge test. The Chaldeans were an intellectually outstanding people who shared their abundance of knowledge with young men through their language, culture, and daily life. Their scenario was similar to students aspiring to be advisors to the world's most powerful king, after studying at the most prestigious university of the time. The training program was both thorough and tough, covering all bases. In addition to the Chaldean language, the curriculum included history, literature, astronomy, and the mystical arts that made the Babylonians famous. Consider the difficulty of learning a new language for serious philosophical and scientific debate, rather than for casual communication. It required enormous effort and ingenuity, but Daniel and his friends were successfully relearning a new language of thought. As they immersed themselves in Babylonian culture, Daniel and his companions encountered a moral quandary. How could they accept their captors' wisdom without giving up their religion and sense of identity? Today, many people face this challenge. Where do we turn when confronted with challenges to our fundamental beliefs? Daniel's reaction was to maintain his composure and seize the opportunity to learn while remaining firm in his principles. The introduction of new cuisines was one of the first challenges. The king's decision required the lads to eat at the royal table, which meant they would most likely be eating foods forbidden to Jews under Jewish law. Daniel's faith and diplomatic skills were on display here. He did not flatly refuse. Instead, he proposed a water and vegetable diet. We learn from this method that when we face ethical quandaries, we must be creative in order to find solutions that allow us to honor our principles without alienating those around us. Cultural and political education were also essential components of Babylonian education. Daniel and his buddies were studying royal court protocol as part of their educational program. Imagine yourself immersed in the intricate procedures and hierarchies of an ancient court, where the level of sophistication was unrivaled. Every word and gesture has significance. This incident not only honed Daniel's intelligence, but also helped him blossom into an accomplished diplomat and leader. The Babylonian University was a place of fierce competition and rigorous training. Daniel and his friends were not only studying, but also competing with Babylon's best and brightest kids. Not only did it require intelligence, but also guts and commitment. As captive foreigners, they faced daily challenges in demonstrating their worth, such as academic difficulties and antagonism from locals. Daniel received an education in Chaldean literature that included everything from ancient epics to philosophical treatises. As a result, he was able to broaden his view on life and learn about new cultures while being true to himself. As a prospective advisor to the king, his ability to understand and communicate with people from diverse cultural backgrounds would be critical. The Babylonian astronomy course was really demanding. The Chaldeans' advanced knowledge of the sky enabled them to employ it for both scientific research and divination, gaining them tremendous acclaim. Daniel had to tread carefully in this area, appreciating scientific knowledge while avoiding acts that contradicted his religion. The need of being selective when absorbing new information is emphasized here. During their training, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah formed a close friendship. They formed a support system, encouraging each other to accomplish their best academically while adhering to their ideals. This collaboration serves as a timely reminder, especially in difficult circumstances, of the advantages of surrounding oneself with like-minded people. Daniel learned about global politics while serving in the Babylonian court. He was investigating allegiances, disputes, and royal intrigues among the period's many empires. With this knowledge, he would be able to properly assist his customers through the difficult political climate of the ancient Middle East in his future consulting role. Daniel and his pals grew increasingly conspicuous as the training progressed. They stand out among their peers because they are dedicated, intelligent, and honest. Their professors, and finally the monarch, took notice of this. Their accomplishments demonstrate that success does not have to mean abandoning one's moral compass. Daniel's education did not include only secular knowledge. In addition to his formal schooling, he continued to study Jewish scriptures and customs extensively. His continuous dedication to his spiritual heritage, even in an unfamiliar context, displays his extraordinary character and deep faith. Another goal of Babylonian court training was to prepare individuals for royal duties. In addition to academic knowledge, Daniel gained practical expertise in leadership, diplomacy, and governance. He was being shaped into a statesman capable of advising rulers and changing the course of history, as well as being a smart man. Daniel and his comrades were ready to face their final test as the training period came to an end, an examination by King Nebuchadnezzar. This key event determined the outcome of their education, and thus their life. The stakes were great, but they were certain that their tenacity and faith had positioned them for success. Just as Daniel was about to go on the next leg of his journey, he completed his formal education in Babylon. His years of study had reinforced his faith and refined his character, in addition to providing him with information. He was prepared to face the challenges that lay ahead in the royal court, where his brilliance and honesty would be tested in ways he never imagined. The young prisoner, who had become one of the most esteemed advisors in the mightiest ancient empire, was on the approach of becoming a legend. The royal dinners held at Nebuchadnezzar's court were famed for their lavish spending. Consider tables decked with wonderful fare from throughout the vast Babylonian Empire, including unusual wines, bizarre dishes, and the finest delicacies. The concept of indulging oneself to such luxury appeals to many young people. However, this abundance presented a significant spiritual and moral quandary for Daniel and his companions. Even while it had very stringent dietary requirements, Jewish law was far more than that. It was an important part of the Israelites' religion and identity, since it helped them maintain their distinct identity and unwavering commitment to God in the face of numerous alien civilizations. In addition to his personal desire, Daniel recognized that dining at the royal table could damage his spiritual purity. When confronted with this predicament, Daniel has several options. He could have given in and assumed he was a hostage with no choice but to comply, claiming he was simply following orders. On the other side, he may have stubbornly declined the given food, openly revolting. By opting for a different tactic, Daniel shone brains and courage. Daniel calmly and respectfully offered a test to the cadets' commanding officer, the chief of the eunuchs. He suggested a 10-day diet, consisting solely of water and vegetables. This thought was not just an act of tremendous faith, but also a practical solution to his dilemma. In essence, Daniel was placing his trust in God, who he believed would care for them and prosper despite their strict diet. Danger loomed in Daniel's request. After 10 days, the chief of the eunuchs faced the king's wrath if he and his associates did not appear healthy. The ability to trust God despite the gravity of the conceivable results is a sign of mature faith, and Daniel's suggestion shows this quality. Instead of a miracle healing, he placed his trust in God's unchanging provision. Daniel and his friends followed their austere diet for the entire 10 days of the challenge. Consider how tough it is to resist the appeal of royal delights while everyone else indulges. This regimen was more than simply physical training. It also included spiritual practices like his fasting and dedication in the face of religious persecution. Daniel's diet of water and vegetables was motivated by more than just the desire to avoid restricted things. It was an expression that he prioritized his uniqueness and values before worldly possessions and social prestige. Even when it's difficult, we should follow Daniel's lead and stay firm in our values, because we live in a world where there is a lot of pressure to conform. As the days passed, an extraordinary incident unfolded. In fact, Daniel and his companions appeared stronger and healthier than their contemporaries, who dined at the royal table. This conclusion affirmed Daniel's faith, as well as God's power, serving as a silent testimony to others around him. Beyond Daniel's local circumstances, the impact of his experiment's success was far-reaching. They were able to maintain their spiritual integrity while still excelling at their jobs, as this demonstrated. As a result, it became evident that serving the king and remaining faithful to God were not mutually exclusive goals. Notable is the chief of the eunuchs' reaction to the test results. He gave Daniel and his friends the go-ahead to continue eating whatever made them look good. We might learn from this encouraging reaction that sticking to our values might earn us respect from those who disagree with us. Daniel's diet experience taught him about leadership and put his faith to the test. Daniel demonstrated wisdom and compassion for others by proposing a solution that reflected his principles while also performing his duty as the eunuch's leader. This strategy teaches us how to negotiate and settle issues in a way that benefits all parties. Another lesson we may take from Daniel's diet narrative is the importance of setting a good example. His other students, and possibly some Babylonians, must have followed Daniel's decision and its results with interest. Being honest in a quiet way may make a significant difference in the lives of others around you, and our actions often speak louder than words. The events in this chapter shaped Daniel's stay in Babylon. Difficulties with his views would continue, some of them more dangerous than the issue of nourishment. Nonetheless, this initial victory strengthened his resolve and reinforced his confidence in God, preparing him for the trials ahead. The story of Daniel's eating extends beyond sustenance and bodily well-being. In the face of a negative or apathetic attitude toward our religion, it is an effective metaphor for cultivating our spiritual life. We are called to emulate Daniel's astute decision-making in choosing spiritually nourishing foods that will strengthen our relationship with God. Daniel and his friends gained rank and clout as word of their successes spread. Their unwavering devotion to what appeared to be a small issue paved the path for additional responsibilities. The value of keeping integrity in our daily lives cannot be emphasized, as it prepares us for future occupations in which our impact will be considerably greater. The great King Nebuchadnezzar had a nightmare one night. When he awoke, he was so distressed and confused that he had no recollection of the unsettling dream. Aside from highlighting Daniel's extraordinary genius, this nightmare would shake the Babylonian Empire to its foundation. Nebuchadnezzar summoned his most trusted advisors, including astrologers, magicians, and soothsayers, in an attempt to discover the significance of his long-lost dream. He not only assigned them the seemingly impossible task of understanding the dream, but he also compelled them reveal its contents. The king, driven by paranoia and wrath, issued a severe ultimatum: interpret the dream or perish. Anxiety and confusion ensued in the royal court. When confronted with an insurmountable issue, the wise men begged the king for pardon and additional time. Nebuchadnezzar, convinced of a scheme, ordered the execution of every wise man in the kingdom, so their pleas remained unanswered. Daniel stepped forward at this vital juncture. Daniel demonstrated exceptional bravery after learning of the circumstances from Arioch, the royal guard commander in charge of carrying out the killings. He did not flee or hide, but instead approached the king and requested time to figure out the meaning of the dream. This heroic deed saved the lives of all of Babylon's smart men, not just his own. When Daniel returned to his accommodations, he gathered Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his three buddies, for a night of intense prayer. they prayed God for understanding and compassion as a whole. In times of crisis, spiritual community is essential, as this act of communal faith reminds us. To overcome this difficulty, Daniel turned to his fellow believers for encouragement and prayer. That night, God showed Daniel a vision that explained the dream and its significance to the king. Daniel must have felt overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. This experience reinforced his idea that God is the ultimate source of wisdom, and that his servants' sincere prayers are heard and answered. Daniel was delivered to the king the following morning. He delivered a shocking announcement to the assembled court. The monarch has demanded the revelation of a mystery, but no magician, enchanter, or diviner has been able to offer it. However, there is one God in heaven who can. Daniel was not only preparing to reveal the dream with these statements, but he was also extolling the wisdom and majesty of Israel's God. Daniel reported Nebuchadnezzar's dream in considerable detail. The statue the king had beheld was massive and wonderful, with a golden head, silver breast and limbs, bronze abdomen and thighs, iron legs, and clay and iron feet. The detailed depiction, which astonished Nebuchadnezzar, verified Daniel's true understanding of the supernatural. However, the meaning of the dream was only disclosed at the beginning. The divine interpretation, Daniel explained. The golden head, he explained, represented Nebuchadnezzar's own Babylonian empire, while the rest of the statue represented following countries. The following kingdoms would be powerful at first, but then deteriorate until the kingdom was split and defenseless. The interpretation reached its climax when a stone that had not been sculpted by humans collided with the statue, causing it to shatter into bits that were subsequently blown away by the wind. This pebble eventually developed into a gigantic mountain, encircling the entire planet. This, Daniel explained, was a symbol of God's everlasting reign, which will eventually exceed all other kingdoms on earth. Nebuchadnezzar reacted strongly to the interpretation. Because of Daniel's wisdom and the magnificence of the God he loved, the king knelt low to the young Hebrew and showered him with gifts and honors. At this point, Daniel had progressed from a lowly prisoner to a highly respected and powerful counselor at the Babylonian court. Nebuchadnezzar's dream symbolized God's power and strength, as well as Daniel's personal victory. In addition to sparing Daniel and the other wise men's lives, God used this occurrence to establish his dominance over all of Earth's kingdoms, including the strong Babylonian Empire. We might learn a lot from Daniel's dream interpretation story. Prayer in times of crisis, tackling seemingly terrible situations with courage, and humility in acknowledging that God is the source of wisdom and understanding, are all lessons we may take from this. Even in difficult situations, we must have faith in God and declare His majesty like Daniel did. As a result of his right interpretation of the dream, Daniel was given more responsibilities and confronted increasingly tough challenges. His unwavering dedication to a critical task enabled him to have an impact on history and throw a light on the God of Israel amidst the Babylonian Empire. As Daniel's trip progresses, we will see his faith tested and strengthened by increasingly difficult trials. In his ecstasy over his own magnificence, King Nebuchadnezzar ordered the construction of a gigantic golden sculpture. This huge monument, built on the Dura plain, served as a symbol of the Babylonian king's ostentation and hubris. The sculpture's massive size made it the area's prominent feature, serving as a brilliant symbol of the king's entire supremacy. It was declared through royal decree. Everyone was to worship the golden statue by bowing down in response to the sound of musical instruments. Disobedience would result in horrible consequences, and the order was straightforward. Anyone who refused to worship was instantly punished by being thrown into a burning inferno. More than anything else, this was a time to demonstrate one's unwavering loyalty to the monarchy and empire. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Daniel's buddies, attended the dedication ceremony. After years of imprisonment and service in the Babylonian court, these young Hebrews, who had remained faithful, now faced their most difficult test. They had an easy decision to make: give in to temptation and save their lives, or remain faithful to God and die a horrible death. The three young men remained calm as the music began, and the congregation knelt in awe. Nobody noticed their violation of the rule of bowing. Resentful informants lost little time in telling the king of the Hebrews' disobedience. The news angered Nebuchadnezzar, who immediately ordered the three to be brought before him. Despite the king's rage, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah remained determined. When faced with adversity, their reaction was an amazing story of courage and faith. The king was even more enraged by these words due to their conviction and lack of fear. The infuriated King Nebuchadnezzar had the furnace turned 7 notches higher than usual. The young men were supposed to be tossed into the fire, but the troops entrusted to the task perished in the flames. As the devout Hebrews looked to face a certain demise, the court witnessed a sight of terror and suspense. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were thrown into the center of the scorching furnace, tied and fully clad. The viewers readied themselves for the sight of their bodies being engulfed in flames in an instant. However, something unusual happened, which surprised everyone, including the king. Instead of cries of pain, footsteps and voices could be heard from inside the furnace. Nebuchadnezzar approached the furnace and stared within in disbelief. He was shocked by what he saw. There were 4 people, not 3, going freely through the flames, unharmed. A monarch claimed that the 4th man appeared to be a celestial offspring. In addition to protecting God's faithful servants, this celestial visitation demonstrated that the God of Israel was more powerful than the Babylonian gods. When Nebuchadnezzar summoned them, he witnessed an even greater miracle. Mishael, Azariah, and Hananiah emerged from the furnace unhurt, with not a single hair scorched, their robes unbroken, and no trace of smoke in the air. The overwhelming celestial protection had kept them safe from even the scorching heat. Nebuchadnezzar saw this as a life-changing miracle. The king's only option in the face of such an outpouring of supernatural energy was to acknowledge the majesty of the Hebrew people's God. Along with promoting the aforementioned 3 young men to higher positions in the kingdom, he issued a new order prohibiting anybody from speaking ill of the God of Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, and Hananiah, and Azariah. Miracles and deliverance are only the beginning of what the story of the flaming furnace has to offer. It is a powerful example of God's unwavering devotion to his followers, even when they are about to die. The 3 young men prioritized God's protection over their own safety, despite the fact that they had no idea whether they would be spared. In this episode, we also learn about true devotion and worship. In contrast to the terrified and conformist crowd, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah taught that genuine commitment is not forced, but rather comes from inside. Their constant determination, even in the face of imminent peril, demonstrates exceptional moral fortitude and honesty. Many people believe that the 4th guy in the furnace represents Christ, the Son of God, who is with us even during our darkest times. When situations get bad, this image serves as a reminder that we are not alone. Those who place their trust in God are never alone. He protects and provides for them. The narrative of the flaming fire contains both teachings and difficulties for current readers. It teaches us to reject the temptation to sacrifice our ideals in the name of social acceptance. It not only encourages us to rely on God for rescue, but it also asks him to give us the strength to remain faithful in the face of adversity. With each new chapter of Daniel and his friend's trip, we see God's stunning revelation of himself via the lives of his faithful servants and the pattern of rewarded devotion. In the next installment of this play, we will return to Nebuchadnezzar to learn more about God's character and plans via another dream and interpretation. As the Babylonian Empire expanded and his conquests proceeded, King Nebuchadnezzar attained the apex of his power. His hanging gardens dazzled visitors. His palaces were architectural marvels, and his word was law throughout vast territory. However, the king's pride was about to be challenged by a nighttime vision that called into question his authority and power. Dreams came to Nebuchadnezzar one night as he slept in his castle. A majestic tree, with branches that seemed to reach far into the sky, loomed before him. With its sprawling branches, it provided shelter for animals and nutrition for all living things. It was a vision of abundance and power, reminiscent of Nebuchadnezzar's own reign. However, everything changed pretty quickly. An frightening proclamation came down from above from a celestial being described as a watchdog and a holy being. The mandate was clear and unrelenting: remove the branches and cut down the tree. The goal was to beat the beautiful tree to a stump before abandoning it to the animals and elements of the land. The dream ended with an even more stunning revelation. A voice foretold that a man's heart would be turned into that of a beast and crushed 7 times. The objective for this radical transformation was to demonstrate to the living that the Most High has ultimate control over all kingdoms on earth and can bestow them on whomever he chooses. Nebuchadnezzar was touched by this vision, so he summoned his council of wise men and advisors once more. As before, no one was able to comprehend the dream. Afterwards, the king was presented with Daniel, also known as Belteshazzar, within the court. Nebuchadnezzar trusted Daniel to answer this new mystery due of his track record of illumination. Daniel was astonished and troubled by his dream. He remained silent for an hour while he reflected on the implications of the vision. Daniel was apprehensive to speak freely, but the king recognized this and encouraged him. This dramatic pause serves as a reminder that sometimes telling the truth is both necessary and difficult. Daniel began to understand the dream with courage and empathy. He went on to remark that the mighty tree symbolized Nebuchadnezzar himself. His empire's power and influence grew. He made an influence all around the world. The divine warning, however, was a command to cut down the tree. The monarch's vanity had gotten the better of him. The interpretation continued with doomsday predictions. As a result of his exile from human civilization, Nebuchadnezzar settled among the farm animals. He'd be covered in heaven's dew while he ate grass like an ox. The monarch would remain in this state for 7 iterations, or 7 years, before ultimately admitting that God ruled over human nations. After ending his reading with urgent advice, Daniel shown amazing compassion for the king who had threatened his life before. His plea to Nebuchadnezzar was for the king to repent of his wrongdoing, live a decent life, and show sympathy for the oppressed. Daniel said that if he sincerely repented, his fortune might last longer. Unfortunately, no one listened to Daniel's warning. After a year had passed, Nebuchadnezzar walked across the palace rooftop, bragging about his glory. "Isn't it my powerful hand that built this magnificent Babylon to serve as the royal residence for my majesty?" He had no idea that his remarks would cement his fate. A voice from above proclaimed that he had lost the kingdom the moment he spoke these words. The prophecy began to come true immediately, soon. As a result, human society expelled Nebuchadnezzar. His body was drenched in heaven's dew, while he lived outside, eating grass like cattle. Over the course of 7 years, the once mighty monarch lost control of his body, becoming savage and untidy. In addition to functioning as a sort of punishment, this moment of shame taught me a lot about human limitations and God's total control. The 7-year prophecy eventually restored Nebuchadnezzar's reason. He had an insight that drove him to look up at the sky for the first time and embrace God's complete dominion. His recovery began with this act of reverence and humility, which marked the end of his agony. At the end of the story, Nebuchadnezzar returns to his throne and is just as glorious as before. The humiliated king had a significantly different personality from the one who returned. In his final statements recorded in Daniel, the prophet praises the celestial ruler, extolling his omniscience and capacity to put shame on the haughty. The lessons of humility, pride, and God's sovereignty are timeless in this touching story. All power on earth is ephemeral, and the key to long-term wisdom is learning to rely on God, as this text so poignantly reminds us. These principles will be demonstrated in increasingly dramatic scenarios as Daniel's trip progresses, culminating in one of the most famous Old Testament scenes. It had been a while since the events surrounding Nebuchadnezzar, and Babylon was now ruled by his successor, Belshazzar. The young king intended to treat 1,000 of his nobles with a magnificent supper one fateful night. Laughter and passionate talk echoed throughout the palace halls as the wine flowed freely. Belshazzar's arrogance, combined with the booze, drove him to make a fate-changing decision. He issued an order for the return of the valuable metal vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had plundered from the Jerusalem temple. While the king and his guests drank wine from these sacred objects intended for worship of the God of Israel, they were actually profaning them by worshiping their wooden, stone, metal, bronze, and silver idols. An strange occurrence unexpectedly ended the festive atmosphere. Human fingers appeared at the lampstand in the royal hall and began writing inscriptions on the wall. When King Belshazzar witnessed this mysterious occurrence, he turned pale with horror. Because he was afraid, his knees slapped together and his legs shook. Belshazzar, in his frenzied hunt for a solution, called for the sorcerers, astrologers, and diviners to enter. He made a solemn vow. Whomever comprehended the written word would be clothed in purple, crowned as the country's third highest monarch, and given a golden chain around their neck. Unfortunately, none of Babylon's great men succeeded in comprehending the complex message. The king's worry was heightened when the wise men were unable to read the calligraphy. The queen heard the chaos and entered the ballroom. She presented to Belshazzar the memory of Daniel, a court official who had served under Nebuchadnezzar, and was well known for his profound understanding and interpretation of perplexing symbols and dreams. The king immediately summoned Daniel to appear before him. Once again, Belshazzar, clearly terrified, offered prizes to anyone who could read the letters. But Daniel gladly declined the awards, claiming he would understand the message nonetheless. Daniel told Belshazzar the story of Nebuchadnezzar before explaining the meaning of the writing. He described how God had humbled the proud ruler as a result of his pride, and how he had finally recognized that the Most High God was sovereign. After Belshazzar desecrated the temple's holy objects, Daniel chastised him for not learning from his predecessor's faults. Finally, Daniel turned his attention to the writing on the wall. Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin were the names of the mysterious words. He began explaining each word's significance to the stunned monarch and his court in a loud, forceful tone. Daniel said that Mene means numbering. God tallied the days of Belshazzar's dominion and brought them to an end. The repetition of the words solidified and expedited this decision. What exactly does Tekel mean? Weighed. When the divine scales were balanced, Belshazzar was found wanting. God had examined his rule and character and determined that they were inadequate. Parsons' singular form, Perez, refers to division. The Persians and Medes would eventually take control of some of Belshazzar's empire. In the final phase of the interpretation, it was projected that the Babylonian Empire would fall soon. Belshazzar kept his pledge despite the grim interpretation. Daniel, dressed in a purple robe and adorned with a golden chain, was crowned the third highest monarch in the land. These praises, however, would not last. Cyrus led an army of Medo-Persians into Babylon that night, while the city slept, unaware of the imminent peril. Even though it was supposed to be unstoppable, the city fell swiftly. The death of Babylonian king Belshazzar fulfilled Daniel's prophecy, which he had proclaimed only a few hours previously. After the old Babylonian Empire crumbled after decades of dominance over the Middle East, a new empire rose to power, the Medo-Persian. When Babylon fell, Daniel and the Jewish exiles entered a new era. As his life progressed, he encountered more dangerous situations, ultimately leading to the famed Lion's Den, a watershed moment in his story. When the Medo-Persian Empire grew in prominence, Darius the Mede was crowned king of Babylon. The new monarch appointed Daniel as one of the kingdom's 3 top administrators, with high aspirations of advancing him to the position of head of government, after recognizing his knowledge and honesty. Daniel swiftly rose to the top ranks of the satraps and administrators as a result of his outstanding performance. Because of his exceptional honesty and competency, King Darius considered raising him to the position of king, which would have given him enormous responsibility and honor. However, other authorities were envious and outraged as a result of this bias. They looked high and low for any evidence of Daniel's corruption or carelessness in government affairs, but they found nothing. When the conspirators determined Daniel's financial record was flawless, they turned their attention to his religious life. Nobody ventured to tempt Daniel from his unshakable dedication to God because they knew how committed he was. The conspirators then devised a sneaky scheme. They approached monarch Darius with an amicable proposal, a royal decree prohibiting anyone other than the monarch from making requests for 30 days. Any violation would result in punishment in the lion's den. Darius was caught aback by the proposal, unaware that the decree included a secret objective. By signing it, he virtually declared it Medes and Persians' irreversible law. Daniel resumed his customary routines after hearing the decree. Returning to his home 3 times a day, he would kneel before his God, open the windows facing Jerusalem, and pray as he had always done. Regardless of human law or the prospect of death, his loyalty came first. When the officers who had been eavesdropping on Daniel arrived, they found him praying and making requests to his God. They quickly informed the king about Daniel's rejection of the royal mandate. King Darius was deeply disturbed by the accusation. Realizing he'd been deceived, he accepted that his decree would bring humiliation to a man he admired. Efforts to save Daniel consumed the rest of the king's day. However, by dusk, the authorities had told Darius that no order signed by the monarch could be amended under Medes and Persian law. Daniel was to be flung into the lion's den by Darius, who reluctantly gave the order. Before being put into the dungeon, Darius prayed to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve ceaselessly, rescue you." The den's entrance was sealed with a large stone, and the monarch's and nobles' signet rings. After fasting all night, the monarch refused to watch any amusement and was unable to sleep. He dashed to the lion's den as soon as it was light. "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you faithfully serve, been able to preserve you from the lions?" Darius yelled out in agony and asked Daniel about it. Daniel's voice in the den responded, "O king, live forever. much to the king's delight and comfort. My God's angel stopped the mouths of the lions. They refrained from hurting me because he perceived no crime in me. Darius, filled with joy, gave the command to bring Daniel out of the den. He had put his faith in God, thus there were no wounds on him. The men and their families who had falsely accused Daniel were tossed into the lion's den at the king's command, but the lions devoured them before they ever reached the ground. Following that, King Darius issued a decree throughout his realm instructing everyone to respect and worship Daniel's God. Daniel, on the other hand, thrived under both Darius and Cyrus the Persian, and his words and wisdom left an indelible mark on Persian history. After Babylon fell, Darius the Mede governed the country. The new king intended to elevate Daniel beyond the rest of the administration, so he appointed him as one of 3 main administrators after noticing his outstanding brilliance. Daniel immediately distinguished himself from the other officials due to his exceptional ability and honesty. He was so impressive that King Darius considered crowning him emperor of the entire empire, a highly regarded and powerful position. However, other authorities were envious and outraged as a result of this bias. Despite their best efforts, they were unable to find any evidence of corruption or negligence in Daniel's government transactions, despite their desire to condemn him. The conspirators, unable to find any professional infractions, turned their attention to Daniel's religious life. They devised a cunning plan, knowing his unwavering commitment. They presented King Darius with a friendly proclamation. People were executed in the lion's cave if they ventured to pray to anybody other than the king for 30 days. Unaware of their true intentions, Darius was pleasantly surprised by the suggestion and signed the document, establishing it as irrevocable Medes and Persian law. Daniel proceeded to pray as usual after learning of the decree. He would visit his residence 3 times a day, open the windows facing Jerusalem, and prostrate in worship before his God. Regardless of human law or the prospect of death, his loyalty came first. The officers who had been watching Daniel caught him praying and swiftly told the king that he had violated the mandate. When he heard the charges, Darius was worried that he had been tricked and that his decision would bring humiliation to a guy he respected much. After the monarch had spent the day thinking different strategies to preserve Daniel, officials informed him that the legislation could not be changed right before sundown. Daniel was to be flung into the lion's den by Darius, who reluctantly gave the order. "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you," the king prayed to Daniel before imposing the death punishment. To seal the den, the king's and nobles' signets were placed on a large stone and set over the mouth. Darius fasted all night, refused to watch any entertainment, and was unable to sleep. At first light, he dashed to the lion cave and hammered the bars, yelling, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to save you from the lions?" Daniel's voice in the den responded, "O king, live forever," much to the king's delight and comfort. My God's angel locked the lion's lips. They refrained from hurting me because he perceived no crime in me. Darius, filled with joy, gave the command to bring Daniel out of the den. He was unharmed because he trusted God. The men and their families who unjustly accused Daniel were put into the den at the king's order. Even before they reached the ground, the lions had them cornered. This act of divine justice demonstrated God's displeasure toward the unjust persecution of his loyal servant. After these events had an impact on King Darius, he issued a new edict that extended over his entire kingdom. He issued the proclamation that everyone should fear and revere Daniel's God, since he is the living God whose rule cannot be toppled. God, who performs miracles on earth and in heaven, was elevated by the choice. Daniel's suffering in the lion's lair served as a powerful demonstration of God's faithfulness and might. Daniel was miraculously preserved, and the experience prompted the empire to declare God's glory. Daniel's bravery and unwavering faith in the face of imminent death have inspired generations of believers to remain steadfast in the face of persecution. His life demonstrates that doing God's will, no matter how difficult or risky it may be, can result in a powerful testimony. The tremendous deliverance that Daniel experienced had a great impact on both his life and the entire kingdom. Throughout Darius and Cyrus's reigns, he was able to cement his power and enjoy enormous prosperity. Daniel's reputation as a morally pure and spiritually powerful man grew as his comments influenced the empire's course of events. Future Persian kings will use this episode as a blueprint for how to handle Jews and their faith. Many people regard Daniel's account of his time in the lion's cave to be one of the most famous and respected stories in the Bible. The supernatural intervention of God, combined with the dramatic tension and suspense, captures the imagination. Beyond that, it demonstrates how faith works, the need of prayer, the courage required to remain faithful to God, even in the face of death, and how God can save his slaves. In addition to proving God's complete authority over human affairs, the story underlines the disastrous consequences of manipulation. Daniel continued to work for the Persian government over time, but his ordeal in the lion's den served as a stark reminder of his faith and God's overwhelming might. This event strengthened both his standing among the Persians and the trust of the exiled Jews. Daniel comforted the exiles that their God could still perform marvels for them, even if they were in a foreign land under the rule of pagan monarchs. The lion's den encounter became more than simply a chapter in Daniel's life, symbolizing faith, bravery, and celestial protection. Daniel's life, from his captivity in Jerusalem to his exile in Babylon, is an amazing story of tenacity, trust, and God's ultimate authority. Keeping their religion strong in the face of an adversarial and pagan environment was an uphill battle for Daniel and his friends from the beginning. Their unwavering confidence in God is demonstrated by their bold decisions, such as braving death in a raging fire and declining the king's delicacies. In addition to his unshakable faith, Daniel was known for his insight and foresight, which he utilized to deliver crucial insights to God's people and the kings he served. It is clear that God used Daniel to demonstrate his power and dominion by interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, writing on the wall at Belshazzar's feast, and Daniel's survival in the lion's den. Furthermore, Daniel is shown the future through his apocalyptic visions, which demonstrate how human kingdoms are ephemeral in comparison to God's eternal dominion. Along with prophesying imminent conflicts and the end of the world, these visions reinforce the belief that, despite challenges, God's plan would be fulfilled. Daniel's experience teaches us to keep our trust, believe in God's wisdom and strength, and know that God is with our servants even in the darkest of times. God, who rules over all nations and has boundless mercy and justice, teaches us through Daniel's experiences that faith and obedience are the keys to greatness.